In the name of Allah, the most gracious, the most merciful. Now we will talk about switch on to fault protection. The first thing is to open my configuration and look at the block. What is my block composed of? I input 3-phase current, 3-phase voltage, and here I input a block signal, the manual cruise command, and Z acceleration, which is the zone or impedance that is supposed to trigger acceleration for the trip. And as the trip here is always fixed, this trip is nicely organized. There is no problem with the current and the voltage. The block here took the block with the VT fuse fail. You might say, oh my, the impedance that performs acceleration won't work if you have a VT fuse fail. I would say, oh, but I have another option called the UI level. The UI level depends on you having executed a manual cross command and then observed that the voltage dropped below a certain strength and rose above a certain strength. In this case, suppose the voltage drops due to the VT fuse fail. You can use the video face with the manual cross command as usual. If you are talking about a double bus single breaker, you take the manual cross command with the breaker, or if you are talking about 1.5, you take the manual cross command with the bus circuit breaker and the manual cross command with the tie, and you take the bus to be closed, ready to close in service. The same applies to the tie. In this case, if you give a minor cross command and the original breaker is already in service, ready to close, you must have the tie closed in service. And to close the tie, the bus must not be closed in service. So if you have the bus in service or the tie in service, either of these two will come here on the note, making the end of these outside amos 0. Any breaker, whether bus or closed, is closed. Is that clear? Great, excellent. After that, I take both to an OR gate and input them to whom? To the PC output, which is the import. I have a very small problem here because the relay, according to its logic in the manual, what does this logic tell you? It tells you that if you have the manual cruise command that came, plus then amperes, secondary anchor, as we will see later how the logic of the manual cruise command works. As long as it comes, the switch is not active, and this is not my usual. My usual is that when I receive a manual cruise command, it activates the switch into voltage for a certain period of time, right? Am I wrong? Great. The certain period of time here is called T switch on to fold, but this is a drop-off time delay, which means after it goes, it counts 500 milliseconds and then sets it to 0. So if a manual cruise command comes and then it was 0, it doesn't consider it 0. It considers it 0 until its duration, which is half a second. This means drop-off time, not on delay time, for example. Oh, sorry, not plus time. So for that reason, I will do something very simple. What did I tell you? I will use a pulse timer here in the configuration. I will output this instead of directly to the PC. I will first input it to the pulse timer and set this pulse timer to 10 milliseconds. What will happen is that if you give a manual cross command and keep your hand steady in the old position, then if you keep your hand steady, it will activate with you, meaning even if you close it. And your hand for 2 years. And the voltage occurs after 1.5 seconds from the moment F will activate. And this is not correct, like the other relay houses. The other relay houses, as soon as you give a manual cruise command, it activates with a pulse, but only for a certain period of time, like a switch. I said a voltage pulse like any other place. Okay, what will I do? We said we will take the output from here and input it to a pulse timer with a duration of 10 milliseconds. So no matter how steady your hand is, this pulse will output from the pulse timer, giving you a pulse with a duration of 10 milliseconds. So the pulse comes here, enters and latches after 10 milliseconds. What happens is the T switch under voltage activates for how long? Sorry. The T switch under voltage is an off delay, meaning the pulse entered and then left. So after it leaves, it starts counting the half second. As soon as it finishes counting the half second, what does it consider the binary input or the brush input to be? It considers it to be 0. Or you set the T-switch input voltage to 0 and set the T-switch input voltage to 5. Or 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 set the T-switch input voltage to 5. The important thing is that this set of exercises together will tell me what period it was switched to. Is everything clear so far? Great, Dad. To test, of course, I will take a binary output from it. To see once. When you switch the input voltage to the maximum and once when it is not, what happens? without assuming a request for zone 2 times 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 zone 2 times. You choose the one that follows immediately. If you choose an off, this means that as soon as it receives your news, the logic that is this will not work. The logic that will work depends on the manual cruise command receiving a plus, then you have to have the acceleration be 1. If you choose impedance mode, if you choose UI level, then at that time the voltage should be less than this value and the current should be greater than this value. Okay? Or it could be that both are selected. This loop, direct way. Second way is without a cruise command and auto initiates. I am using the crane, the cross crane. It also works, but I don't want to use it. I want to use the other method. Why? Auto with the shisha here, no problem. I folded it. It works. Don't give it. The cross crane, third, insert the input. Work with it with auto shisha here. If you give auto shisha here, what does it mean? It must see the line DD and not see Z expression. As soon as it sees Z expression, what happens? It starts to have something within it. This function is active, so how does it work during this period? With the situation, it trips the voltage. I mean, you would think that when this happens, what is the off delay for? Off delay timer. How do you write this logic above? Look at this. Automatic switch onto voltage logic. Voltage and current based is a function that gives an instantaneous trip at closing of breaker onto fault. A deadline detection check is provided to activate the function when the line is dead. Molo distance protection cannot operate for switch onto fault condition when the phase voltages are close to 0. Because the Molo, as you know, passes through 0, at that time it might not notice and not operate, so I will set the UI level for this purpose. This is if you have Molo, so the UI level should not be forgotten. Alright, let's see the principle of operation. The principle of operation tells you the activation from the deadline detection function is released if the internal signal to deadline from the UI level. Who is this talking about? It's talking about the area where it is located. We need to see the deadline here. So what does this mean? Like, when we come here, the supervisor must tell you what? They tell you that you must see the deadline from the UI legal function. At that time, it must see the quality is less than this cup, and the plane is capable of this cup so that it can close a large type. Then, some case activated at the same time as the input, such as not activated during at least TDL. So what does TDL mean? It is the live dead life condition. Remember when you used to be live, and then, depending on the fact that it is against the time period, and at that time, I thought that we could play with this time, 10 risks, 100, 10 autoclaves. Because I know with the switch, who are you blocking? The autoclave, so I gave you time if you were playing against. The bronze goal is not supposed to be active. If you didn't have that time, it means any period you close in. The breaker comes with the switch and your voltage was during the corona, not after it. 2 conditions. So now what happened is it gave you time. If you were live and then became dead, you need to stay for a longer period than that time. In the case of dead, for the risk after that, if the line sees an acceleration, it starts to work with you using the switch and your voltage. But when you perform an update, it has ownership or possession. A banner of sufficiency through owning a sufficiency banner or owning a sufficiency banner to get an update must be used through the remaining update utilities. When you choose the impedance, you will gain ownership of sufficiency when you perform an update. Ownership of sufficiency. You can communicate with users in future utilities. 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 You can communicate with users in future futures. The willable, it works on how to achieve control over control, even if the control is minimal. The logic heavily relies on control over control and control. Control over control. Control over control is closed. If the control over control is less than this subject, and the decision of control over control is greater than the subject of control over control, this subject must exist for a period longer than the T control we will choose. state to state.